Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the next in our series of Roadmap for Progress candidate town halls. My name is David Donofrio, and I'm honored to serve as the chairman of Roadmap for Progress. And tonight we are joined by Elizabeth Madeira. Is that
M-
pronounced correctly?
Madeira. That's very close.
Madeira.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Like the
Uh,
wine.
she is running for State House in the great state of Tennessee. So we want to welcome you to tonight's town hall.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here and grateful you guys are taking the time to highlight all the different endorsed candidates. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. So just a real quick, a little bit of housekeeping. Tonight's town hall will be approximately 30 minutes or so. We are going to give Elizabeth the opportunity to introduce herself to you and talk about the most important issues in her campaign. We do want you from wherever you are to be able to get involved in Elizabeth's campaign, and we've got a couple ways you can do that. Pinned to this video and listed on our social media is the donation link for Elizabeth. You can feel free to contribute to her campaign that way while you watch. In addition, this weekend we are going to have a day of action for her. And so you can RSVP to that event on Facebook. And her campaign is going to be helping us with a way that you can get involved from anywhere you are. So we hope that you'll join us in that. I definitely will be. Um, so yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So Elizabeth, if you don't mind introducing yourself to us, give us a little information about your background and why you decided to run for office this year.
Yeah, and I'll also say you might hear some thunder in the background, everybody. There we do have a thunderstorm happening right here in Middle Tennessee. So
Stay
um,
safe.
yes, yeah. So if I have to run out really fast, it's because it turned to a tornado warning. So
Understood.
but yeah, so I'm Elizabeth Madeira, and I actually would consider most of my life, I consider myself to be a conservative Republican. I grew up conservative and evangelical, and those things kind of went together for a lot of my life. But Sandy Hook really was a big eye-opening turning point for me. I was a teacher in elementary school, and our oldest was 6 months old at the time, so I was a new mom. And I know so many of us can still remember exactly where we were when we heard the news. And I was sitting at my teacher desk in my school, horrified, grieving, sad, and also scared, feeling like how this could happen in any community, including mine. So at that point, I really started paying attention to even the representatives that I had previously voted for and what they were going to do in the aftermath and what they were going to do to make our community safe and pass common sense gun legislation. And I was just, I was obviously not paying a lot of attention to politics before because I was just appalled at the inaction and the gridlock that happened. And so many conservative Republicans that put special interests in the NRA ahead of keeping children and communities safe. And so that was kind of a big wake up call for me. And from there, just kind of learned more about politics, tuned in a lot more, and especially by 2016, seeing that Donald Trump was the Republican nominee, I thought, well, this is not match up with my faith as someone who believes that you love your neighbor as yourself. And everything he did was so contrary to the values that I grew up with. And so after the election of 2016, I looked up my county party, my local county's Democratic Party, and went to the first meeting and was like, okay, what do we do? I just really wanted to be a part of the solution and moving my community and state in the right direction here in Tennessee. And so in 2018, I did a whole lot of volunteering for local candidates, door knocked, phone banked. And by then we had 3 kids. And so there were a lot of days where I was pushing a stroller and the 4-year-old was riding a bike along as we knocked on doors in various communities and neighborhoods around in my district. And it was just really a lot of fun to get the kids involved. And I knew for sure that I wanted to get really involved in the presidential race too with whoever, whichever candidate really stuck out to me. And so, to be honest, when the slate of candidates was first coming out, nobody was really piquing my interest until I heard an interview with Mayor Pete. And I just really loved how he was focused on the systems that needed to, the systems in our democracy that are not currently working, such as just voter suppression happening across the country and things like that. And so, and I also love that he was an elder millennial like myself. And even though it's something that we may say, oh, you're too young to run for president, he still went for it. And I was really inspired by that and the way he really led with his values, which is my values are really why I ended up switching political parties and political views also. So I was inspired by his campaign, and then I ended up becoming the Tennessee statewide grassroots organizing lead for his campaign. Just kind of originally in early 2019, created a Facebook group that got hundreds of people involved within a month, and people started asking me how to get involved. And I said, well, I guess this is what grassroots level really means, and we figured it out and had an amazing group of volunteers across the state that I got to work with. And it was really cool to pull people into the political process who hadn't really been involved before and who were excited about change and progress. So then after he dropped out, the current incumbent that has been in there for 18 years and was last year his campaign, he was so he got into so many scandals in his office that he was featured on John Oliver. There was a segment featuring him.
Oh,
Yes. So there was a series of racist texts, really discussing inappropriate texts about women, all with his chief of staff. There was his chief of staff did cocaine in the office. There was, oh my goodness, there's videos of him running away from pregnant reporters. And then this year he ended up getting not reporting over $100,000 of campaign expenses. So the list just goes on and on. And I live in this is a pretty historically conservative district, and they did not put another Republican on the primary against him, and there wasn't a Democrat on the ballot either. And I thought, you know what, if not me, then who? And so decided to step up and run for office because people may say, oh, it's a red district, it's a red state, let's just not put any effort into this. I just feel like it's really important that we do the work of listening to people in our communities and trying to do best by them. And we're not going to make progress if we just cede control to the Republican Party across the state. And so that's why I decided to jump in and run a really strong campaign with a really strong team. And it's been really great to see the momentum and see how many people are excited about my campaign and getting rid of this 18-year incumbent.
that's
Oh, you
awesome.
can, yeah, and you can, if you want to Google him for more details on the scandal, it's Glenn Cassida, and you can find the John Oliver clip on YouTube. It does cost, I think, a couple dollars, but I would say it's worth it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for stepping up. And I mean, it's people like you know, particularly in these areas that might be historically not not the strongest for the Democratic Party, but where I mean, people can't just get away with doing anything like that and continue to maintain the public trust. And I know that that's something very important to Mayor Pete and to all of us at Roadmap for Progress. So thank you for running. Um, so I wanted to lead lead a little bit into this and talk about so Roadmap for Progress has several different key values that we espouse, and obviously one of the things key to your heart that you have made a center of your campaign, watching any of your videos, your family, but certainly education and our next generation. And I wanted to, you know, that's of great importance to me as well. I wanted to see what policies you believe in particular Tennessee could benefit from for its public schools. If you're serving, maybe some legislation that you would introduce or support.
Yeah, well, and I think first of all, it's good to share a little bit of backstory. Another thing, while the incumbent that I'm running against, he was actually Speaker of the House last year, and one of the big bills that he pushed was a really controversial voucher bill that would take money from public school funding and put it into private schools. And there was a series of issues with it. It ended up being deemed unconstitutional by a judge, but of course now the Republican supermajority, including our governor, is wanting to rewrite it and make some tweaks so that it can still go forward. And so my number one priority is protecting public school funding. Tennessee is really low on the bottom for that in terms of spending per student. And so I think the absolute last thing we should be doing to support our public schools is taking more funding away and putting it in private schools. So I think that's the number one thing. And even this year, after the pandemic, the original budget for the state had promised teacher raises, and then they ended up in the final budget cutting those. And I just feel like how can we cut teacher budgets in this time of crisis for teachers, where that more is expected from them than ever before? I mean, we already have super high expectations for teachers with low appreciation, and I feel like this is just another further example of that. So that would be my big first priority, is making sure that public school funding stays in the schools, in the public schools, and also that teachers get raises that they're promised. So that's a big thing. And I also think, and besides specific legislation that's already been done, there's definitely, with our Secretary of Education here in Tennessee, there's a lot of movement towards pushing charter schools and vouchers over and over again, which really strips the resources from our public schools. So I know in other states, there might be things that are more progressive happening in education. And I just think, and here in Tennessee, in a state where we have such a super majority of Republicans, even doing the basics of just making sure that teachers are paid, making sure our schools are well funded, that's kind of the top priority for me. I think in politics, most of the time, the people that are passing legislation regarding education have never even been teachers, never been in a classroom. And I think we absolutely need to do more listening to teachers, listening to what they need, because they're the ones on the ground with the students in the classroom. They know what they need. They know what we need in terms of testing. This year of all years certainly needs to be a year where we go back, look at testing, make sure we're not focused so much on testing that we're not able to teach. And unfortunately, well, our local districts all across the state asked the governor for special exemptions from testing and the required school days, just due to all of the COVID stuff and needing to have virtual schools and things being up in the air. And the governor has said no. So I think that that's absolutely something that we need to be pursuing, is listening to teachers and responding to where they need, instead of having these unrealistic expectations for them, putting them on the front lines and then not appreciating them with the resources they need. And also by, continuing to ask more and more out of them. Now we already ask teachers to be counselors and social workers and obviously teachers who teach, and to then ask them now to be like on the front lines of a pandemic is just, it's just a lot. And I think that they need more appreciation and support across the board.
Without a doubt. Thank you so much. Um, and so to lead kind of into that, you've already alluded to the incredible challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic is causing in education, but in society as a whole. Not a single one of us has not been touched by it. And I think what it brings home to me is not just, the immediate of what we need to do right now to help all the people who are suffering, but what does it hearken to the future as well, of to ensure that, um, heaven forbid something like this happens again, the next, whether it be the swine flu or West Nile or whatever it might be, how can we prepare and how can we put the resources in place now, so that we can try to blunt the entry of whatever would be next coming our way. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about how COVID-19 has impacted your community, and how, now that this has happened, does that impact the role of a legislator?
Yeah, so here in my community, we have not yet been hard as other communities across the state, because we're suburban rural. And so I think it's still data is telling us that it's hitting the cities hardest and then moving more to suburban rural areas. But I think definitely businesses have suffered. A lot of people have lost their jobs. We have definitely historic unemployment happening. And unfortunately, our county just expired the local mask mandate for here in the county, which is really discouraging. I feel like even knowing all the data that we know, that how much that everybody wearing a mask can slow the spread, it feels really discouraging, and that we're taking steps back. And I know that wouldn't affect my job necessarily in the legislature, but just to kind of give you a picture of the area. I think that that should carry up to the state level. Like, we should make sure that we have mask mandates until we really have the virus under the control, which we do not yet. And that's, we actually, Tennessee is even more right wing in our hesitation to do mask mandates than states like Alabama and Texas. So I feel like if we want to keep our community safe, we have to, number one, listen to scientists and take their advice, which we know masks is a big thing. And we need to make sure that we continue with the accessible and affordable testing, which actually Tennessee has done a pretty good job at. But we really need to work on the transparency and the contact tracing. Those are both things that we really are not, up, they're not as strong as they need to be in Tennessee. Actually, even recently the governor stated that they're not going to have a database where they show the information about which schools have COVID cases. So, which to me just seems pretty reckless for the public
Yeah,
to not know which schools have COVID cases. Because if you obviously have high risk children or someone in your family is high risk, you need to know those things about the school. So thankfully, schools, our local district has said we're going to be releasing the data every Friday so that you know if there's any COVID in the school or in your kid's classroom or whatever, because they'll let us know. But I feel like it's not okay for the leadership at the top to just keep pushing it down on local municipalities. We really need to have transparency across the board, across the state, so we can know where the outbreaks are happening, how to respond. And if we don't have that information, the state is just abdicating their leadership to the local municipalities and kind of passing the buck, which I have an issue with. But I would also say, when you're talking about making sure we have the infrastructure when this happens again, Tennessee is one of only 11 states that has yet to expand Medicaid. And actually, recent statewide polling shows that the majority of Tennesseans, no matter their political party, think we need to expand Medicaid. So the fact that we aren't doing this, we lead the country in the number of rural hospital closures per capita. I think only Texas has more in number, but we have more per capita. And if we had expanded Medicaid, we would have slowed, if not stopped that. And it's just devastating. It's going to be devastating when COVID really hits our rural communities and their hospitals are closed and they have to drive hours to get to the local hospital. Not to mention all the people who fall in that gap of not having employer-based coverage and can't afford their premiums. And all of this could be mitigated by something simple as expanding Medicaid, which really just gives the state back the money that we've already paid in federal taxes. I think there's this messaging that means it costs us a lot of money, but it's the tax dollars we've already paid, and it would just come back to us instead of being distributed to other states. And I think that's kind of one of my number one things that we need to do in Tennessee and as the state legislature is making sure that everybody has that accessible and more affordable health care.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Um, And for everyone who is, by the way, just joining us, we wanted to introduce you to Elizabeth Madeira, who is running for state representative in Tennessee. She is one of our endorsed candidates for Roadmap for Progress. If you would like to get involved in her campaign from anywhere in the country, you can do so. There is a link tagged to this video where you can contribute. And in addition, there will be this weekend a day of action. And we'll be working with her campaign to put that together and have ways that you can get involved from anywhere where you are. So stay tuned to that and RSVP on Facebook. Um, I did also want to go into the other kind of defining issue of 2020, um, systemic inequality and the Black Lives Matter movement. And again, as we kind of look toward this not just in a vacuum, we're already witnessing, despite what has happened in Wisconsin recently, a great decrease in the amount of protests. The national conscious is already shifting away from these inequalities, and it's really important to Roadmap for Progress and to the movement in general that this not just be a bumper sticker or a slogan, but that we really do something meaningful and lasting to impact change. And so I wanted to ask you uh, also in a similar vein how this movement has impacted your community, what you've seen there, and what you think that Tennessee can do to usher in um, more equality in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And this issue is really personal to me. Um, my first two kids, we adopted them, and they are actually not white. And so when I think of Black Lives Matter, of course, it's really personal to me that my kids' lives matter here in the community. And I will say that I have been overall encouraged by what I've seen here. And like I said, it's a historically red suburban rural district where racial justice has, and it's a majority white community, so it has definitely, racial justice has not been something that like comes up a lot, but there are several big book clubs that have kind of started that have met outside that have, historically had like 10 people show up, and now I've attended a few of them when they were outdoors and they had like 300 people show up to, talk about the book, White Fragility. And even before it became a book club, to just talk about the issues of racial justice. And I will say that I've been to a lot of protests over the past few years at our little town square, and we usually get, a couple dozen people, definitely less than 100. And the one that I went to a couple months ago had, again, a few hundred people. So I think I was actually listening to a podcast today, and they were talking about how, in terms of racial justice, so many of our beliefs are based on epiphanies that we have, that, just things that people say or that we hear, that we experience, and just really open our eyes. And I feel like this experience this summer and the killing of George Floyd really was an epiphany for so many people, even in our little district. And I went to, um, Nolansville is another little, I guess, town inside of my district, and they only have like 8,000 people, and they had an event that had at least 500 people show up, for like
Oh,
that had speakers and a march and all kinds of stuff. So I feel like people are really starting to pay attention. People are really starting to care, and it's really cool to be a part of that here in town. And so anyway, this is definitely, I feel like racial justice, criminal justice are all things that are really important to me, and I would bring those values to the state house. Also knowing that, you know, the important thing to do, I guess, is to pass the mic to and elevate the voices of other black legislators down in the Capitol, and make sure they're the ones who we are listening to and following their lead. But I would promise to listen to and follow their lead as the things that they recommend we do legislatively.
wonderful. Thank you so much. Um, I wanted to turn the discussion a little bit to leadership in general. I think to too many of us, we are not seeing leadership displayed from the White House. And in fact, recently, what we saw with the convention on the White House lawn, I think, I mean, beyond illegal, it's just what it means to our national psyche. So I think there are a lot of people though who might feel turned off by both sides, and they might still just be a little bit on the fence of does my vote matter? Does my voice matter? If you could speak to a little bit aspirationally, what we should be looking for in a strong leader, what we should be seeking in public servants, and and also just to anyone who might be listening who is still on the fence, why is it important to care and to be involved this year?
Yeah, great question. And I feel like I was actually talking on the phone yesterday to someone who actually just lost their primary in a different part of Tennessee, and they lost by like less than 20 votes. So if you think your vote doesn't matter, it really does. You never know how many, especially when it comes to local races, right? It's in a red state like Tennessee, I think people think, oh, my vote doesn't matter in the presidential race, so I'm not going to vote. Well, first of all, it does matter in the presidential race because your vote and your voice always matter. But second of all, your vote really matters in local races because the win margins are so much smaller. And so, and again, with talking about my opponent before, you kind of talked about Donald Trump, but I feel like he's taken a lot of the same steps of like, I can do whatever I want and still get elected. I can, you know, make bad calls. I can be scandal ridden in my personal life and all these things and just still win and have no consequences. And so that's why a big thing that I'm running on is honesty, integrity, transparency, because I think the community deserves someone that they can trust. We need someone, whether or not we agree with all of their policies, someone that we know who cares about the community, somebody who wants to listen to the community. And, you know, I am a former conservative, so I understand a lot of those values and ways of thinking. And I care about people who may disagree about policy with me. And I want to hear from them. And I also care about people who are more progressive than I am. And I want to hear from them and what their solutions are. And I think that we right now are in, I think, kind of a problematic political time where there are extremes and there's a lot of really divisive rhetoric. And I think that people are looking for leaders who listen, who care, and who want to make a difference, who can be pragmatic and make compromises. I think one of the things I say, one of my taglines, I guess, is I'm a mom of three, so I'm used to cleaning up messes, making compromises, and breaking up fights. And so I think that those
Love
really
that.
are skills that that a lot of people want to see in their leaders, in their representatives, is not just someone who um, just is so stuck in partisanship, but someone who really listens and cares.
I love that. And I am really hopeful listening to you and just having heard your messages and things like that, that your community does the same and that they listen and really look beyond party and pay attention to the quality of an office holder, and what they really want for someone to represent them in the Capitol. Um, so along those lines, then obviously knowing that we kind of tonight have a national audience paying attention, but we certainly view you as one of our future leaders and someone that we really wanted to lift up and give a broader megaphone, to anyone who might be watching this. Maybe they live in a super blue part of the country that they don't have to work on their races because everything is done for them, or someone who maybe is not contributing to races because they feel, oh, this is $1 billion presidential race. What difference does my $5 make? What would you say to one of them about the difference that they could make in your race, and what difference would that make for your community?
Yeah, well, I will say everything in campaigns comes to, we say, raising funds and raising friends. So we have to raise money to reach voters and then just really work on reaching voters. So whether people help us out by phone banking or writing postcards, just the more contact we have with voters to let them know that there's a good alternative to the incumbent is great, super helpful. And in order to do a lot of things like mail and digital ads to reach our voters, we need money. So, and my opponent actually has over $300,000 in his bank account because, well, I don't know about his personal bank account, but his campaign account, because he's been running for 18 years and has not had a lot of competition along the way, has not had a lot of opponents. And so he's got a lot in there. And so every dollar helps, whether we have, the majority of our donors are give $50 or less. So whatever you can give is great. If you can give $500, please do. And one of the things that would be so historic about this is that there's never been a woman who represents this district, and Tennessee has actually never had a mom of young children in the state house. I mean, think of how
Never.
many ever. So, and
Wow.
thankfully there's multiple moms of small children across the state running this time. And so, but we absolutely think about how many moms of small children there are and moms of big children there are all across the state that could use more representation in the state legislature, because that's who our decisions are affecting, our families. So both of those would be really historic things. Not to mention, it would be really great to oust the former Speaker of the House, who has really tarnished my district's reputation with all the scandal. So all of those would be super great reasons to get involved.
Thank you so much. And so, to everyone, to get involved, one more time, uh, tag to this video, we have a donation link. Please give anything that you can. You can also contribute to Roadmap for Progress in general so that we can help Elizabeth and other candidates like her across the country, which we certainly will be doing. And in addition, there's going to be this Saturday a day of action where you can assist Elizabeth from anywhere in the country. Any bit of time, talent, or treasure that you are able to contribute to this race. As you can see, just listening to it, this is why we are lifting up this race, not just the circumstances, but the incredible talent of Elizabeth and what she is going to bring to the legislature. So, Elizabeth, thank you so much for talking with us tonight and for being a part of the Roadmap for Progress journey. We really appreciate it.
No, well, thank you guys so much. It really means a lot to have your support and your endorsement. So I really appreciate the work you guys are doing. It's really inspiring and is a good motivation for other folks to get involved by following what you do.
Absolutely.
And
We will
look, and the
do.
electricity stayed on.
It did. It did.
Yeah.
I didn't hear too bad of thunder either. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you guys so much. And I hope that you have a great rest of your evening. Make sure to tune in next week for another of the Roadmap for Progress town halls. Have a great rest of your evening.